Good evening, everybody. I'm super excited because today I have a special guest, Kristen, also known as Foolproof Baking. Seriously, the breads that you are making are just out of this world, Kristen.
Thank you. It's so nice to talk to you finally and meet you. And thanks for the honor of being interviewed. This is cool. I was telling Hendrik earlier that this is the first time I've done an interview or any sort of thing where I'm showing my face. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking for me. But I'm glad that you invited me to do this. And I think it'll be cool to get out of my comfort zone.
Yes. And I mean, you have contributed so many amazing things to the baking world, I think. And whenever I look at your Instagram channel, I'm always thinking, wow, this is another level of sourdough baking. I mean, just look at a bread like this, for instance. And I'm super curious, what's your story? How did all this start, Kristen?
So I don't know. I would never have pictured myself here even like 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, honestly. My background is in biology.
Okay.
So I have a PhD from Northwestern University in Chicago, and it's biology. So there was a component in the laboratory where I worked with microbes, but our research was focused on the gut and the progression of cancer, like small bowel polyps. Yes, very fancy and classy stuff. But it was actually incredible, the experience, and I got a lot out of it. But I finished my doctorate, and then I had my son, and there was no kind of easy way for me to get back in. So I just other mothers may understand where I'm coming from, but I kind of felt like I lost myself. Like I had gone from being, research track and like getting the doctorate and feeling really great about that. And then everything changed, and now I'm just a mom, and I felt very kind of stuck at home, and I had no direction. So I think probably when my son was 1.5 years old, I started doing some editing, some science editing, which wasn't really my jam, I would say. But
what is science editing? Sorry for the stupid
question.
Science
editing. So whenever you are publishing in science, you have to submit your papers to peer review. So before you do that, you usually want to pass those docs through an editor. Same goes for grant writing. So when you want to submit a grant to the government to get funding, you usually use an editor. So it's very dense work, I would say. Wasn't really like my favorite thing, to be honest. But around that same time, I started making yeasted bread. So, pinch of commercial instant yeast from Red Star. I literally would take all my ingredients and just put them in my mixer bowl with the yeast, mix everything up, not knowing what I'm doing, and just, shape it into a log, plop it in a tin, let it rise, bake it.
Okay.
It was very easy, but it would also gave me sort of like this homey feeling.
Okay.
I just enjoyed that. And so
reminds me of my mother when she baked when I was younger. Yeah.
It's amazing that there's nothing like it, just providing bread for your family like that. It was fantastic. So true. I loved it. And then my father-in-law was like, you're doing editing, you're doing baking. He's like, you should have a name for yourself. So he's like, why don't you use a name that works for both of these industries? Foolproof. So that's where the name comes from. And so I started an Instagram page after spending, over a year just sort of lost and trying out a bunch of different types of what I like recipes, more or less. And, the Fresh Loaf Forum was key for me. Any question I could come up with, it was already there. And, people had already asked these questions. And then there were answers and discussions. And that was so fantastic for me. And then kind of on the social bent, finding groups on Facebook. So Facebook had like a Perfect Sourdough and Baking Bread with Friends. And these groups really had this community vibe to them. And it was nice, like connecting with other bakers in that way. And obviously learning and, posting what I had done to that point and just hearing feedback and giving my feedback. And you learn that way. You learn when you teach.
Yes.
So my sister told me I should join Instagram. And so I did that. I remember this moment where I was like, should I call myself Foolproof Baking or Foolproof Bakes? So I was like, which one should I do? But I settled on that, and then learning how to hashtag and all that good stuff. And that is really where I think the whole idea of the art of bread came out for me. So two things. So it's like the art of bread. So like thinking like Daniel Larson and Bread Journey, Anna, and Sourdough Nouveau, Lisa, is these accounts were just mesmerizing to me. I was like, I'll never achieve what these people have achieved. And then there's on the opposite end of the spectrum, there was sort of the science bent or teaching bent. So those are like Trevor Wilson, Maurizio. These accounts were like, I was like, that's what I want to do. So like if I'm going to post bread, I'm going to give back. I'm going to, cite people and tell, how I learned something, or maybe I don't understand why something happened, but I'm going to post it, and I'm just going to be open and honest and just let's see what happens. I never once would have thought the account would have blown up. That was very random. I feel honored to have the position I have now, but honestly, it's kind of just grown slowly over time. And then with the last year with COVID, as you know, I'm sure everyone wants to make sourdough bread all of a sudden. So that was really fun to tackle those more newbie level questions and sort of orient myself for that crowd.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think at the start, when I would read some suggestions from somebody, I would always think, okay, this is exactly what I have to do. I have to change my recipe. I have to follow this tip. But over time, you sort of also develop a feeling for, okay, this might not work, or this is a good idea, what to do, right?
Yeah. So, of course. So initially, the reason I put quotes for recipes earlier is, initially you think of bread making, you want a recipe. And as you continue to make that recipe, you start realizing, that recipe was written that way because that worked for that baker. Everyone has different flour, different sources of water. They have, different starters. They have different ways of maintaining their starter regimen, all that good stuff. So there's not really one recipe that works for all. And so I think that's sort of like the wisdom stage of baking, right? So you start thinking, I have to think about how bread's going to work for me in my special situation, in my environment. And that's, I think, where I really started to get a handle on things. So, and really also trying to relay that, trying to tell other people that point is actually kind of a difficult one, because they want a recipe. They want, give me a set of instructions. I want to know exactly how much water in grams, hopefully in grams, not in cups. And then, like working on opening the mind to just because it works for me, you might have different flour, different starter. Like it's going to be hot where you are. It's not hot here. Like all of these things, it's a big interplay mix. But that's what makes it so fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. You always have to adapt for your own environment, right? And I think that also makes especially sourdough baking so hard, because you can never exactly follow hydration formula, never exactly the timing. You have to experiment on this yourself.
Yep. Or not even. Some people are afraid of this word experiment, but just holding back. My big key thing for people is hold back water. If you're trying something new and you've never tried it before, and you find a recipe online, please hold back some of the water. Put it in a bowl. You can measure it all out, but take a few tablespoons out, put it in a separate container, and then make the bread. And if it looks like the video without that extra water, don't add more water. It's much more complicated than that, but that's usually a good trick for.
Yeah, I would say so too. Many people see those amazing recipes and then they see, 85% hydration. So hydration, that's the water content, how much water you should be using per 100 grams of flour. And then they try it with their own all-purpose flour at home. And then they're wondering, something is very, very sticky.
Why do I have soup?
Why do I have soup? Yes.
It's so sad because they usually contact me and I don't necessarily get a chance to look at their emergency message right away. And so I'm looking at their bowl and they're just like, what happened? It's like just,
I feel you.
just a pool of pancake batter. And I'm like, oh no, like, can I add more flour?
Yeah.
Not really. Like, not at this stage, you know?
Yeah. So true. Yeah, it's not so easy. At the start, I think my first sourdough bread was actually quite good, but then the second and third ones were a complete fail. And that actually got me started to think, okay, there is something to this. I need to understand what's going on here.
Oh yeah. I remember my very first bread. I wish I took a picture. It never crossed my mind. I'm not, it's funny where I'm at now, but like when I got started, taking a picture of my bread seemed hilarious. Like that would not have been a thing. But I remember cutting it. I remember what it looked like. It had not a single, like not even fool's crumb. Like it wasn't even, there was not a single air pocket. It was just smooth and like wet. That's what I remember.
Okay. Yeah. That's a sign that you didn't ferment long enough, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Or forgot my start. I don't know what it was. There was no fermentation.
Is that what people would call a gummy crumb? I always get a little bit confused. Well,
I think people use that term in different ways. So I think a lot of people use it as gummy, like under fermented, like this is like a raw, wet dough. It didn't open, it didn't ferment enough. You don't have all those little alveoli bubbles inside. So when you bake it, the heat just can't penetrate evenly through the whole loaf. Okay. And I know we'll talk about open crumb later, but I think a lot of people, they are getting fermentation, they are getting openness, and then they're like, why is my bread gummy? And I think it may not be gummy is the right word, unless you maybe way over fermented, which is another story. But a lot of times it's just like a chewy texture.
Chewy. Mm-hmm.
So when you cut your bread, if it's open, but some of the bread sticks to your knife, this I would call more like a chewy texture, sticky, chewy, and that's a characteristic of the flour you're using, right? So a very high protein flour is going to give a more chewy crumb that maybe you think of as wet, and then a more lower protein flour, like an all-purpose, is going to give you not dry, but more tender and delicate. If you tear it, it tears right away, like a sandwich bread.
And which kind of texture do you personally prefer, if you had to choose one of them?
So you must know from looking at my page, I like the chewy breads. I like that they're like moist, and I don't like gummy. I'm not going there, but I do like when I pull it apart, it just sort of like a rubber band for a little while, like tears apart nicely. But different breads, I like different things. I would not want that in my sandwich bread. I would not want that in my dinner rolls.
So it kind of depends on what you want your bread to be, right? Do you want it to be the star of the dinner party, or do you just want it to be a side to support the main course a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. And heartier breads, like what you generally make, you don't really want those to have the same characteristics as you would, a very light, open, fluffy type. It's a different type of bread. You want to choose the flour accordingly.
So if we're talking about a bread like this, is a bread like this always sort of that wet consistency inside, or can that also be done with an all-purpose flour, for instance?
I also want to say I work with very high hydration. I have flour to back that up. I'm lucky to have that flour. But in general, my dough is very, very wet. So when I bake it, it needs to be high heat. And I need to sort of leave it in the oven after the bake for another 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just to get rid of all of the extra moisture. Because they can get to be wet, and I don't like that. So no, that I wouldn't say that loaf would be wet, but it is using, high quality flour. But if you look at it, you can kind of see.
Put that up here one more time.
You can kind of see, like, this was a mix of flour. I don't like to use just all white flour. I like to use mixtures of grains and things. So this would be like a mix. It's not I don't want to say this is not ultra open. It is, but at the same time, you can kind of see it's fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, all of my breads are generally a mix.
Yeah, they look amazing. And my next question would be, I'm a complete Instagram noob, okay? So earlier I wanted to share on my story that I'm talking to you tonight, and then I got an email from you saying, hey, Hendrik, something is wrong with your story. I think you forgot to add the link to it. Yes. So I had to just delete it and repost it again.
You know what? I'm getting older. I'm getting older, and I notice that when the app changes, and they do this often, so they do this on, Facebook and Instagram and all these different apps, but it drives me crazy because I like the little add a post button got moved for like a month.
Yes.
And I was yelling at my phone. I was like, why do this to me? And then now they have, IGTV, they have Reels.
True.
They have other things too. I've never done it. I don't know how to do it. And it feels like just more new things. I lose myself. So
yeah, also, I had a private Instagram account, but I seriously have never used it. And now suddenly I have this Instagram account and I really have no idea what to do with it pretty much.
Yeah. So I have a sister who is 3 years younger than me. So I was born in 83 and my sister was born in 86. And something about that cutoff, she gets things faster than I do, for sure. And so for me, it was her helping me. So when I first posted my photos on Instagram, I didn't use a single hashtag because I didn't know what that was. And she's like, no one can see your bread. No one can see it in the catalog. So I was like, all right, teach me. So I get some tips from her. And then I just learn slowly how to use the technology.
Okay.
YouTube is like a completely different animal.
Completely different game, yes.
You are rocking the YouTube channel. So
Thank you.
I have a problem with showing my face on camera, which is, I think, a definite negative when it comes to YouTube. On Instagram, it works, but on YouTube, maybe not so much. So yeah, for me, it's just harder to nail down the YouTube. And also, I find that on YouTube, the people there are a little different. Like, it's just not as homey feeling as it feels on Instagram and even on some pages on Facebook. There's more mediation somehow on Instagram, where YouTube is just sort of like, whoa, anyone can say whatever they want, which scares me. That scares me too. So I don't post as much as I should.
I should do a video on Hendrik reads mean comments, something like this. I get so many amazing comments from time to time. Yeah. It's a war zone. It's brutal sometimes, but you learn to deal with it.
The first video I ever posted on YouTube was a rough one for me because I didn't know people were going to be commenting on my voice, like when the lack of a voice, or when I'm doing coil folds, if I'm wearing my ring. Like, these are big issues for some people. And so this is my home baked bread. I'm just sharing with you what I do. Like, you don't have to be so hostile.
Yeah. And one thing that you always have to play the YouTube algorithm. That's what I personally find a little bit annoying, because I'm not the person, for instance, I don't like to use clickbait titles, but if you want to beat the algorithm, it's all about how many people are clicking your videos, for instance. And you sort of have to go into this zone, like the best bread. Although I would never, being an engineer, I would never,
something, yeah.
I would never claim myself that I'm making the best bread. I'm probably just making a below average bread. But if you want to succeed on YouTube, if you want to grow a little bit of an audience, then you just have to play this game. And it's personally, I find that very frustrating from time to time, because that's not me.
Yeah, no, I love that you say that. Yeah, I saw the title in the YouTube video and I was like, I don't know about that title, but I get it. No, I do understand where you're coming from. And I don't know, it's like even the word like influencer bothers me. And you sort of have to get over it. I don't know. It's just have to figure out a way to coexist and make it work for you and keep it authentic. And
that's very important.
Open and just do what you do best and try to love the process. If you start feeling the stress and like all these little things about, sometimes I'm like, oh, I got to post a blue bread soon. Like I haven't seen a blue bread recently, but that sort of takes the fun out of just, oh, there's a blue
Let's talk about that a little later. That looks amazing. That's witchcraft.
Oh my gosh, that came from Ratty Extraordinary Bites on Facebook and on Instagram. She is playing with these blue butterfly pea flowers and making a tea and using the tea to make the bread. But we'll talk about it later. She's amazing.
And I have a question for you, because my pictures always look so incredibly bad. And then, I'm seeing pictures like this from you or this. How do you take those amazing pictures? What's the secret?
Okay, there is a little bit of a secret.
Okay.
The secret is lighting.
What's that?
So it's lighting. So like
lighting,
natural
okay.
Lighting,
yeah.
And finding that perfect angle on an overcast day. And God forbid you have a bright, sun-filled day, because that's going to mess up your photography. And then I really think that the knife is important. So like when you slice your bread, you're going to think I'm nuts, but I clean my knife between each slice so that I can get a clean, smooth knife, and then I can cut another slice if I need to.
Okay.
So then this is especially true for croissants, by the way, because you want to maintain those honeycomb, the layers, the pattern. So if you use, a knife that's just hacking at your bread, a dull knife, you're going to mess up the crumb. It's just going to look gummy and messed up. And that's not where I needed to.
So when you saw without a lot of pressure, pretty much.
Yeah. You got to get a sharp knife.
Okay.
Right. So like a sharp knife and just gently back and forth. And really it's really that first slice is going to be your best one. So try to feel your bread, you hold it up. You're like, where's the best? I wish I had like some sort of like an MRI or CT scan of the bread. Like, this is the best slice right here.
And I would say I always like to slice my bread in the middle as well, because then I can take a nice picture. And I always like to call that the tenderloin piece, pretty much, because those slices in the middle are like the tenderloin of sourdough baking, pretty much. They're perfect for making a grilled cheese, for instance.
I love that. That's amazing. I'm going to use that from now on. Absolutely.
Tenderloin.
Yeah.
And do you just take pictures with your phone, or do you have a special camera set up to take pictures?
For the last 4 years, I've been using, this is like a shout out to Google Pixel. So I use a Google phone. It's called the Pixel. So I just have upgraded every 2 years or so. I like the camera. when I was shooting portrait mode. Just sort of like brings the bread front and center, and sort of you can see that. You know what's behind that picture? My closet.
What?
So I take photos all over my house like an insane person. I have way too many photos. But to get that shot that I like, that's what you got to do. It's so dumb. This is taken on my stairs.
So you're just taking the bread with you. You're trying to find that perfect lighting, and then you're.
And by the way, when you take your pictures, you cannot face your bread directly at the sun. It drowns out all the holes. So what you want is the holes to be in shadow, and you want to set that top layer of bread to just barely pick up the light, so that you get this crystal, like just slight lit up the area surrounding the alveoli. That makes sense.
But that's also amazing, right? That you can just take your ordinary smartphone and start making amazing pictures like this.
These phones these days, I have a friend who is a photographer. She actually photographs for my my e-commerce line, my starter jars, and she she uses her phone a lot of the times to photograph, because she said the quality of the cameras are so great now. So
yeah,
it makes it easy for me, because all I need to do is just turn up the light maybe a little bit and just step away.
Okay, I definitely need to go into a food photography workshop, I think.
Sounds like a fun workshop, actually. Just talking about bread. It's not even food. It's specifically bread photography. It's like that's whole other
Open
animal.
crumb photography. That's a specialized workshop. And so, I mean, last year, your Instagram account blew up when everybody was starting to bake sourdough, right? How you now, as far as I can see, you have 360,000 followers by now. How do you keep that community from working? Because I mean, at that large size, it's not really possible to answer everybody, right? Or how do you go about that? I always find that very hard.
So before COVID hit, I think I was around the 150,000 mark. Just to give you an idea of how much it's grown just in the last year.
Wow.
Which is it's overwhelming. I mean, it's kind of scary is what I'm trying to say. So when I post something now, I'm very, I really try to go back, dig up all citations, anybody who might have inspired me along the way. So giving credit where credit's due is a big thing. Making sure I'm not, saying something that's a little off that might insult a certain crowd of people. It's kind of, it's just a little nerve-wracking every time I hit that post button,
Yeah.
And I still mess up. The last time I posted pretzels, not the one from a couple days ago, but before that, I casually mentioned that these were bagels. Somewhere in the post, I was like, these bagels, because I was talking about lye and the dip. So yeah, I got a bunch of comments from people and they just like, bagels, they're not bagels, they're pretzels. And then another thing was I used recently, I got a bunch of this amazing flour from Central Milling, which is this, it's a mill here in the States, just awesome quality flour in general. But I got something called, it's made from a winter wheat and it's like 11.5% protein. And I called it an all-purpose flour. Oh my goodness. Mistake. So my DMs and email just like blew up and people were like, this is not in all-purpose flour. And I was convinced, I was like, it handles like a bread flour. Absolutely. I changed it. I just edited my script and I was like, all right, we're not calling it that anymore. This is an artisan bread flour. And it truly is. But just, having to manage that expectation is sort of overwhelming. And so that's not really answering your question, I guess. But
I feel you, though.
What I do is I read everything. I promise I read everything. But I can't comment back on everything. I used to do that. Even last year I was doing that. And it was just, I was spending every hour of my day on Instagram, hearting people's comments and trying to comment back. And I am so grateful for all of those comments. It's amazing. And I'm sorry. I feel guilt like you wouldn't believe to not be able to get back to everyone, right? But in like by direct messages, what I'll do is I'll read everything. And if I see a question that's coming up often enough, I know it's time to post on that topic. So I kind of let the community drive me where to go. So if I get enough people talking about starter care, I'll try to put in a post about starter care. Almost all of my posts that are experimental in nature or like, A/B testing. So like side by side, change one variable. That's almost all coming from other people asking questions and me trying to figure out what is the best way to like to help and answer the largest number of people at one time. So that would be in the form of a post. And I promise you, those posts are for the community. Like that's where I'm trying to go with it. Or at the very least, if it's something I can't dive into, I'll try to comment to that person and be like, here's some resources. You can check out Michael Wilson or Pasta Madre, and you can talk about, where to get the information. Maybe if I know it, I can help out. But
so are you using Instagram on your phone or are you using Instagram on your computer?
Both. So one of the things that I love, I just like bashed Instagram for updates, but one of the best updates was recent, and you can now comment back to DMs on the laptop.
Right. Yes.
I love that feature because what I'll do in the mornings is I'll usually dedicate an hour to just answering questions. So I'll have my tabs up because it's always it's common questions. So I'll have posts that are just buried, so I have to go through and find those. And I can just do it all on my laptop now, which is so much easier than.
Yeah, you can also post from your browser on your computer. I don't know if you saw that you can also create real posts from your desktop.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
So normally when I upload a post, I would always do this via my phone. Yeah,
wait, you can do that on your laptop now.
Yes, you can do that on your laptop, but you have to hack it a little bit. You have to inspect element in your browser, and then you have to say, okay, I'm in iPhone mode, and the moment you're in iPhone mode, it will show you the button to publish a post on your desktop. I can show you later.
Your computer background is coming in handy here.
Yeah, but I feel you. I also feel guilty because there are so many comments, and I always want to answer all of them as well. But sometimes it's a little bit hard because you also, at the same time, you want to be innovative, right? And you want to test new things. So how do you allocate the time between answering comments and being innovative, trying new things, right?
So right now is actually sort of an overwhelming time in my life in bread, because I have a lot of these little side projects going on. And, they don't work out the first time. Like I want to test something and it doesn't work. So there's a repeat bake with variation. Maybe that's not quite where I want it to be. So I'll have to bake it again. So these take up, I don't bake that much. I bake a loaf a day, maybe a loaf for 2. If I really need, I've got a lot of work to do. But yeah, in those cases, I'll just, I'll try to focus my energy there and maybe take a few days off of Instagram, because I noticed the comments go down after, 2-3 days. You have sort of a break on that 3rd or 4th day. And sometimes I need that. So I just won't post as much. But if I'm ready to put something out there, I try to dedicate a larger portion of my next day or the day of to answering questions and trying to get it where people are having trouble. Yeah. And that's when it's on the top of their mind anyway. So it's good to get in there right away and answer questions. Somebody asked me the other day, a couple people asked me the other day when I posted pretzels, they were like, is it safe to eat the pretzels after you bake them? Like, how many pretzels is safe to eat after you dip them in the lye? Because this is like a caustic, toxic thing, right? Toxic is not the right word. But, I was like, right away, I have to tell them, it's okay to eat pretzels. It's okay to eat pretzels. This bakes off, it changes in chemical nature, so you can eat the pretzel. So some of the questions are more pertinent and more timely, and some of the questions are something I can work on later or message that person privately and answer the questions. But right now, I have all this flour. In 1 week's time, I've managed to get all this new flour to work with, and so I'm sort of splitting my time between trying to post and do experiments, and then also work on these side project flower testing sort of things. And that stuff doesn't all go onto Instagram. So it's sort of it's for me to learn and get back in touch with mills and tell them my experience working with flour, but that doesn't necessarily get put on social media. There's a lot of bakes that don't make it to social media, only some of my favorites are the ones that are kind of fun to look at. Those go up there.
Now that you mentioned the topic pretzels, so we Germans love pretzels. Especially in Bavaria, in the southern part of Germany. And I was visiting a mill last year, and then Monica, the owner of the mill, as a gift, she just gave me a pretzel. And apparently there is a baker next to the mill, very close, and all this baker does is bake pretzels his whole life. And apparently he's using a very random technique to make the pretzels. I wonder, one day I want to have him on an interview as well and just ask him about how he bakes his pretzels.
Oh, that sounds fun. So did you get to see him make the pretzel? Or did you
just
get to make the pretzel?
Unfortunately not. But as far as I know, so his secret is a little bit that he dries out the pretzel before he's baking the pretzel.
That's a key thing. So can I tell you a kind of funny story? So
yes, please.
I just shaped all these fun pretzels the other day, and my son was watching. He's like, "Do this shape next." So fun. Had them all on my tray, and my tray wouldn't fit in my fridge. Luckily, it's cold outside that day, so I took the tray outside and put it on my deck, uncovered. It needs to be uncovered so it dries out that top layer, right? But it's outside uncovered, and we have squirrels.
Oh, no.
I had to, on the other side of our deck in the backyard, I had to sprinkle some seeds and nuts just to keep them away from the bagels. But it worked. They left them alone. So
it would have looked fun though, a half-eaten pretzel by a squirrel.
Little nibble marks. Yes. That didn't make the cut to my post. But yeah, that's the truth behind those pretzels.
What would you say then, coming back to your Instagram account, what would you say then is the best way to ask you a question? So if somebody wants to ask you a question, what would be the best way for you to be able to answer most of the comments?
Yeah, so don't message me right after a post that's getting a lot of traction. I think you're going to show this video of this bread blooming in the oven with the after that post went like viral in bread terms, and I got just an onslaught of messages and comments. It's hard to even read them all in that situation. So if you notice, after that day, I went like 4 days before posting again, just to give myself a little break after that.
Let me put on that video now, because I just have a comment. For me, it just says here as a comment on the video that I want to show. What is going on? I have no idea. I'll just put that here on the live stream for everybody to watch. Look at this amazing sorcery. I've never seen this before. What is going on here, Kristen?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I had to go back to my original post here. So the technique is from Joseph Pasquale, if I'm pronouncing that correct. So this is where you have two different doughs. They're both fermented, but one is low in hydration, enough low hydration where you can roll it out. So actually, if you go to the post prior to that one, there is like a how-to video series on how to make that bread. But you basically you ferment your dough. You shape the large middle portion into a bowl, pretty tight. And then you roll out the stiff dough. You put oil on the stiff dough. And then you put seeds on the outside of the bowl. And then you transfer that. It's super challenging, by the way. That was not the first time I'd done that. So you have to be very careful, but you put it on like a plate of seeds, have the seeds attached, and then you put that on your stiff oiled dough. You wrap it up, you put it in your banneton, you let it overproof a little bit. So you let it rise in a warmer spot, or let it proof for a longer period of time. So it's really quite puffed when you go to bake it. Then you score the top, and then you bake it, and that's what happens.
That's just amazing. So the inside is the stiff dough, and the outside is the not as stiff dough, or the other way around.
Reverse.
Okay.
Yeah. It's I did a little stencil on top. So that design was more or less inspired by Sourdough Nouveau. And Ratty Extraordinary Bites. So Ratty did that too. That's incredible. So cool. It was so fun to make, and I didn't know the precise measurements of like how much water to add to the top loaf or the main dough. So it took a few tries before it became something that looked proper and pretty.
Is this then like a fun project that you like to do from time to time, just to test and see how it works out? Or
yes. So most of my Instagram page is these artisan hearth loaves, almost always batard shape. And there's a reason for that. But once in a while, I'll need to bake something else. Pretzels, bagels. The dinner rolls, something like that monstrosity. And it's fun. It keeps it interesting for me. Like on top of all the other breads that I'm making constantly that don't make it to social media, once in a while I want there to be like a really fun bread that people can look at. And I find it best though when you do those to help people out and let them know how you did it.
Yeah.
So not just post it and say, look how cool, but to help them along too. I think that's the key of making that account Foolproof Baking work so well is the helping aspect of it.
I actually also have a challenge because I have some Russian friends, great Russian friends, and they challenged me to bake a matryoshka bread. You know, the Russian dolls, which are stacked on top of each other. And the idea is pretty much that you basically, what's the best part about bread? I think that's the crust, right? If you have that crispy crust. And they challenged me, Hendrik, you want to make a bread that's pretty much stacked with multiple layers of crust, where you start to bake one bread, and then you wrap that in another bread, and you wrap that in another bread. Slowly, your bread gets bigger and bigger.
Is it sort of like, so when you cut it, sort of rainbow pattern, like different colors?
So there might have been a beer too much involved when we came up with the idea, but the idea is pretty much that you just have a bread inside of a bread, then you cut through it, and then you see another bread inside of another bread. And of course, the smaller breads also have crust. So you'll have more crust and more crust pretty much stacking up.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if that is going to work in practice, but you should absolutely try it. That's hilarious. You know, I have this banneton that I haven't really worked with that much, but it's very long. Like it's a batard shape, but it's not quite a baguette, but it's very like elongated. That gives you a lot more crust because when you bake it, you get these.
Oh, I see.
It's just more like a tube.
Okay.
More like a baguette, but it's not a baguette. It's an actual shape for an elongated batard. You might like that one. I'll have to share that one with you.
I just saw somebody here on the live chat, and that is Matthew James Duffy, the professor of sourdough.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you, because that was a question by one of the viewers, and that was, I'm so sorry for not being able to pronounce your name. Let me, Ekiots Vergara. Vergara asks, which have been the bakers that influenced you the most, next to James Duffy, of course.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Duffy is a good friend. He's got the coolest job. He like is an actual professor. It's mind blowing how cool that is. So I would say the bakers influenced me the most. So earlier on, it was definitely Danny Ayo's The Fresh Loaf Forum. That was everything, and I still go on there. I still absolutely am learning from that, and it's great to just go on there and see what people are talking about from time to time. Maurizio, absolutely. The Perfect Loaf is just fantastic because he posts the why. You know, he's not just like let's make bagels. He's like, let's use High Mountain Central Milling Company flour because it's high in protein. It gives you very chewy bread, and then why, how much water to add, and he explains why, which is very important. And then on Instagram, I would say a lot of, Trevor Wilson, just my hero. He's just so amazing. And on that same topic, books, that's actually the only book that I've read on sourdough was his ebook called Open Crumb Mastery. I always mention it in my workshops and anytime I get the chance. It's just such a great read. And you'll notice that a lot of the techniques I employ are, like the coil folds. He goes into so much just deep dive posts on that one aspect of bread baking. So vitally important to me when I was just starting out.
I think so too, right? Trevor has contributed so much to the baking world.
I mean, I tell people when I read that book, it was just light bulb moment after light bulb moment for me. Just so many things that I kind of had experienced but couldn't quite put them together the right way.
Yeah.
And he explains them so well and with humor and with, again, the like honesty and just, yeah, it's a great read. Highly recommended. And then Autumn Kitchen, Choosy. So she had this post a couple years ago where she talked about her method, and she was really instrumental in getting me to understand the benefits of lamination folding. We can discuss like semantics of this term, whatever. We all know what it means. So
This is a different style of lamination, or?
So I can't see the video, but
Wait,
is it running on your end?
Yeah, wait a second.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is like stretching your dough out like a pizza. And it's really nice for early strength building in the dough, or at least structuring and organizing your dough, your gluten. So I love it. I love it as a baker who only makes one loaf a day. It's so fun. And it tells me a lot about my dough. If I stretch it out and it tears, this is usually a sign I shouldn't be doing lamination on this given dough. You know, there's no point in doing it. It's overstressing the dough. It's tearing. It's not good. And then what I use it mostly for nowadays is I see that coming.
Yes.
Good job. Good job. What I use it for these days is mostly for getting ingredients into the dough. So seed sprinkling.
Okay.
Lemon zesting, is that a word? Or layering doughs is a big one.
Yeah. There are some inclusions here. So those you would also be adding during the lamination stage, for instance?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I use this technique that I talk about a lot. It's called the split dough technique, where I'll have one dough that I prepare, say, but I cut it in half, and I'll leave one more or less alone. And that one just sort of is the high integrity baseline dough. And then the other dough, maybe I'll add in oats, or I'll fold in something, or like potato or something that will disrupt the gluten. But maybe I don't want to disrupt all of the gluten. Or maybe I want a dough that's more swirled, like a marble bread. And for that, I like to split the dough into two and add color to one dough and not the other, whatever it might be. So I love lamination for that. It helps me bake a lot of different types of bread, and it helps me incorporate ingredients.
So when you're mostly baking, then you're all mixing by hand, or are you also sometimes using a stand mixer?
I do use a stand mixer sometimes. So there's days when maybe I want to make a larger bread. Maybe I want to just, maybe I don't have a very long auto lease, so I will sort of use my mixer to build up some strength in the dough. So maybe like a 20-minute auto lease, and then I'll throw it in the mixer. Usually very high hydration. I use like the paddle, so like I'll really whip it.
Okay.
And yeah, so I use the mixer. I forgot the main question there. But
no, the question was, so you sometimes use a stand mixer as well. And what my next question would be follow up, what would be a recommendation that you would give somebody when using a stand mixer?
That's a good one. So add the liquid ingredients first. So if you put dry in and then you put wet on top, there's always like this dry bits on the bottom. This depends on your mixer. This totally depends on your mixer, but I'm using the KitchenAid Professional Series, the 600 model. But the if you're using high hydration dough, you can use the paddle, and it really helps out a lot there. But what I'll do is I'll put water, then the flour, say, and then I'll kind of scoop out the dough when I add the levain and put the levain on underneath, and then mix that. And then I'll scoop out the dough again and put the salt on the bottom, and then it's just sort of picks it up as it goes around.
Could you please say that one more time? Was it levain? Because I never know how to pronounce it.
Levain.
Okay, so both is going to work. Okay.
Starter. We'll just say starter.
Starter. Okay, that's a good tip. Follow-up question on that, because you said you were baking once a day typically. What would be the bread that you would make for yourself on a daily basis? Your sort of default bread that you personally like to eat?
So yeah, it would probably not be one of the crazy fun circus breads. It would probably be more like so there's some wheat grains that I really like to work with. They taste really good. So I'm focusing a lot on flavor. So for instance, I'll just throw a name out. Meadowlark Organics, which is a local farm and mill here in Chicagoland. They have a bolted bread flour. And so bolting is where you have some of the bran and the germ back in the bread. So it's not just a fully sifted,
Okay.
very low extraction flour. Its flavor is incredible. So I would probably make something high in that. For instance, I also like wheat that has these like flakes in it. So the bran isn't totally milled perfectly, finely. It's got some texture and some differences in it. So
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I love that too.
It gives it a nice texture.
Yeah.
And yeah, just sort of maybe upping the whole grain component. So I like a bread that's usually between 30 and 50% whole wheat. It's probably my favorite for.
And I do have some pictures of you. That one is, I think, was it 30 or 40% whole wheat?
Yeah, something like that. I don't remember. But I love this bread. This is probably, if I had to choose a favorite crumb style, it would be, I have two, but this is one of them. This is one of my favorite too.
And I noticed that the bottom of your bread here, it's a little bit darker. I'm wondering, at which temperature are you baking your bread?
So again, super high hydration. I like to put this in the oven. I bake it. So do you have, I can't think in Celsius. I think it's 260.
Look what I prepared here. A small table with Fahrenheit and Celsius.
Oh my goodness. See, this is the amazing thing about nerds. This is amazing. Okay, so I do, you don't have my number. So I do 485 Fahrenheit for the first, so what is that, 250?
Yeah.
For the first 20 minutes. And then I do 450, 460 for the last 20 minutes. But then I'll leave it in the oven for a good up to an hour, just to slow cool. And I think that I get that darker bottom doing that sometimes. But it's important because I really want to bake out that extra moisture. That's important.
Okay.
The other thing is I'm using cast iron here. So I'm using the Challenger bread pan. I used to have not a lot of luck with the bottom. It would get very burnt when I first switched over from my stone method of baking. But I figured out that, or I didn't figure this out, Trevor Wilson figured out that if you put like an air gap underneath the pan, directly under the pan, it can help mediate some of it can just prevent excess heat from hitting the bottom of your loaf.
So your pan is sitting on, how do you even call this in English? I don't know.
You can do it in two ways, actually three. So one way is if you have a Challenger pan, you can flip the top upside down and put the bread on top. You have to have a pretty tall oven to do something like that because you don't want it to burn on the top of the loaf. Another way is take a sheet pan facing up and then a sheet pan facing down and then a pan on top. But the way I do it, I have a broil pan. So it's like those black broil pans you can broil salmon on. And I put it directly on that. That lives in my oven. Broil pan, Challenger on top. So
that has experienced quite some bakes, that pan.
Oh yeah.
Is it still safe to make a salmon out of it, or?
I have a different one for actual broiling because I don't want to get any oil on it. It would probably smoke up if I don't clean it perfectly.
Okay.
So it's reserved.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the temperatures because I switched to a higher temperature around the temperature that you have been using, and suddenly I stopped getting oven spring on my loaves of bread, and then I slowly worked myself down with.
Lower? You were baking lower. Okay.
No, so the bread wouldn't rise as much anymore, and then I just tested. I kept reducing the temperature, and I noticed that because I was previously preheating my Challenger bread pan on a stone, and that sort of lowered the actual heat inside of the bread pan. And once I removed the stone, suddenly I stopped getting oven spring, but I didn't think about it, that my pan was now hotter than it was before. So
I would definitely, there's this range that I think is great for oven spring, and you're in it right now. But if I have too low of a temperature, I get a lackluster oven spring. It just doesn't have the same oomph. Okay. And I think where this is coming from is the heat needs to penetrate into the very core of your loaf. So this also is dependent on the size of your bread. So big bread is going to be a little bit more challenging to rise evenly than a little bread that is very quick to heat throughout. And the goal here is to heat it all up and expand those alveoli before it crusts over, right? So if it crusts over, it's doomed to not have the same sort of oven spring and the ear, if that's your aesthetic. And then there's a problem with baking too hot. So if you bake too hot, it crusts over way too fast. And so it won't even fully have a chance to open up. The inside is it's tighter, and it's not good either. So there is a range, and I think the range is about 450 to maybe even upwards of 500. Just be careful when you get to 500 that it does not go over 500, because then you run into the overheating problem.
And do you typically go ahead and use an ice cube or something like this, for instance, inside of your Challenger bread pan, or what do you do?
It's really kind of interesting. So we moved to a rental house this last fall, and I had only baked bread in my one oven for years. It was a KitchenAid oven, and so I had a certain handle on how that oven heated, the evenness of the bake, of the browning in the bake, all that stuff. Then I moved here, and it's a Thermador oven, another great oven brand, I think. But that one it bakes a little cool. So I have to turn the temperature up, and then I check the temperature of my pan to get the actual real temperature before I put my dough in. But that oven, for whatever reason, I was losing blisters.
Okay.
So I threw in piece of ice, because my friend my friend Jim Challenger mentioned it. He'd been advocating this for years. And so I was like, I'll just try it out, and boom, blisters. So
interesting.
I think it was a lack of can an oven be drier inside of a vessel? I don't know.
And so those are the blisters we're talking about, everybody. So you see here on the crust, those tiny blisters. In ancient times, they would be considered a defect, but these days, personally, I gotta say, if you have blisters on your bread, just that extra level of crispness this adds, it's just a bread from a different planet.
When you press on this bread, there is nothing like it. It just shatters. This crust shatters. It's just, I don't know how they could have considered. I know that I've read that before too, but it's not a defect. It's amazing.
It's amazing. I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah, and so my theory a little bit, I'm still testing right now. I hope to get another video out on that topic soon, is that maybe the ice cube just helps to lower the temperature inside of the Dutch oven while still maintaining the hot temperature from the bottom, because you preheated it, right?
So the heat, the steam, the way that the air bubbles are just under the surface, which comes down, also to the fermentation, to the type of flour you're using. A lot of aspects. So I use to get the most blisters, and I have a couple posts on blistering, like really insane number of blisters on one of them. Like it was hard to hold the bread without them shattering all over.
Wow.
But that bread I had done like a cooler, a warmer final proof in a wine cellar, like in a wine fridge sort of scenario. So it was I underbulked and increased the final proof, and it rose in that final proof.
Okay. Interesting.
And that was like the moment of the most ridiculous looking. Also, I had noticed, I had gone through a lot of my old pictures and sort of cataloged them. So I was like, blisters, no blisters. The blisters comes from a really powerful fermentation, one way or another. So having a really fast rising active starter, and then throwing in something like sprouted grain, seemed to give it a little boost as well.
Okay. Those are some really good tips.
I'm sorry, there's 20 variables.
I think so too.
There's never going to be one simple answer.
Yeah, that's the problem with sourdough, right? You have one answer to one problem, and then there are 10 more questions that you have to ask yourself.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So I was learning more about. I want to learn more about starches and enzymes and things. So I took a deep dive one day. I think I was on the computer for 5 hours reading about starches and amylase and all this stuff. And I'm writing notes. I have, schematics, and it just takes me back to like basic biology in college again. But I realize as I read and as I make bread and as I try new things, I know so little. It's such a little amount.
Yes.
I know how to make one type of bread with slight variation here and there. And then there's just this world that, So I also talked to Nikki Gisto from Central Milling just the other day. He was so generous with his time, and we went over some specs about how to look at flour. It was
okay.
It was over an hour-long conversation. By the end, I felt like my head was going to explode.
Okay.
How little I know. And also there's a difference between the home baker and there's a difference between like the miller, or the difference between the large volume baker. And I don't, I'm in my own little bubble, and I want to learn more. But as you say, when you learn something, this presents 10 new questions that you now need to go into.
Yes. And
it's
you feel more
in a good
Yes. And you also feel more insecure about baking the next bread, because with all that knowledge, there's so many more things that you have to
and when someone asks you a
of.
seemingly simple question, now you've got so many things that light up in your brain, and you're like, oh, it could be this.
Exactly.
And all they want to know is, what temperature do I bake my bread at? And I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah.
So many levels to this answer.
There's one question which many people have asked me before as well. I'm just going to put it here. Jim just asked it on the chat. Thank you so much, Jim. He lives above sea level. Does he have to do changes to his dough? I have no idea. What do you think?
I've looked at, so I'm not at high altitude. I'm sorry. I'm not an expert on this. You know who you should look up? Maurizio.
Maurizio.
I think he is at higher elevation. But I think it's something to do with it's drier. So you have to add maybe more water to get the same consistency. Maybe the ferment goes a little slower or faster. I don't remember.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Can't help there.
So Maurizio is the guy you want to check out, Jim. He might have some answers to your questions.
A whole article on this, a whole post on this. And I think the Fresh Loaf always has answers. So look there too. And yeah, there is a difference in the bake. There is a difference in the bake because under sea level, oh my God.
So I know in the Netherlands, you live under sea level.
That's crazy, right?
I think sometimes it's like minus 10 meters or so keys, right? That you 6 meters below sea level, for instance. They need to have water pumps just to survive.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it does affect the bake, how you want to bake. I think you have to bake at hotter temperatures when you're high altitude to get the same browning. So by that logic, you would bake at a lower temperature, below sea level, right?
I have one more question, and we briefly talked about that. You mentioned that. What about if you work in a bakery and you have to make multiple loaves at the same time? Would you say that it's even possible to get such an open crumb when you're making multiple loaves at the same time from one batch? Or is it something you can only do when you have one dough at the same time? What's your experience?
There are some incredible high volume bakers. Dan the baker, I always just like to go watch him shaping his dough and stuff. Yes, I think it's absolutely possible. I think there's a difference though when you're talking about a home baker. This is where I start to feel like less than, because what I do and I try not to think in this sort of way, but the high volume bakers, there's a baker here in Chicago named Greg Wade, and he does bread for the Publican Quality Breads, and his bread is all amazing, and it tastes amazing, and it's just incredible if you ever get a chance to eat it. But and he's like pumping out hundreds of breads a day, and they're all just delicious, but they don't quite look the same as I think as a bread that's being baked in one at a time. All of my focus is on that one bread. So I am babying that thing to the extreme. I'm also feeding my starter in a different way than I probably would if I was working in a high volume setting. These micro feeds I do the 3 times a day, like a crazy person.
Wow. Does your starter have a name?
It does. His name is Ozzy.
Ozzy.
Ozzy, named after Ozzy Osbourne. My mom's favorite band, or one of her favorite bands, is Black Sabbath, and I was raised on this music. And I just thought Ozzy Osbourne's crazy. I was listening to Crazy Train, and I was mixing my starter, and I was like, "Yeah, this starter is crazy," because it was rising so high so fast.
So what would have to be the price tag on a bread like this if you babysit just bread the whole day? It would be very expensive, I assume, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that sourdough should, when you find good sourdough, price it accordingly, because there's so much work that goes into it, and time, and you have to baby sourdough, even if it's something that you're putting 100 loaves out. Obviously, after a while, you have a system. You have your consistency based on your flour, and it works, and so you just make a bunch more of that bread. But I think the thing that I like doing, and the reason why I could never open a bakery, is I like doing a different bread every time I bake.
Mm-hmm. So
that
true.
bread you just showed, I probably will never bake that exact bread again. I can't make that same bread again, because my starter is different now than it was in the fall, than it was in the spring and summer. It's just, everything is constantly changing, and trying to find that consistency. I work in this little bubble, like I said, and I have a basic method. And that method in my little bubble works very well for me. I add in something new, and I see how it affects my results. And then trying to, like I said, usually that first bread may not work out perfectly, so I'll try again. And I will try again until I can get it, assuming it's a good tasting bread. I'll try it again and again until I get it to where it's something that's something I would feel comfortable posting on Instagram or whatever.
How many breads would you say you fail based on your own judgment?
I see you asked this question. I thought about it yesterday because I was thinking you would ask. So you talk about like a success rate. So I think probably my success rate is like 75%.
That's pretty good.
I think it's a pretty good success rate, but there's absolutely the bread. But I think, it comes back to me not exploring every possible thing. I'm working on this basic method and then just making little tweaks based on my flour, whatever.
Yeah. And I still think, regardless, even if a baker might consider it a failure, then you give this bread to your neighbors or to some friends, and they're just saying, wow, this is the best bread I've ever eaten in my life.
I know.
The blisters.
When I was looking back at really old bakes of mine, I would gift them out all the time. I still do. But my friends would take them, and they never once said a thing about, oh, this bread doesn't have an ear, or this bread doesn't have the crackly crust, or this bread. Some of them were completely under fermented, right? Like fool's crumb galore, but they love it. And that's the great thing about bread. I don't think of bread. I try not to think of bread as, this one's successful, this one's not, or this one failed for some reason. It still tastes great. And it's still something you put love and your energy into. And we should try to think of bread in as much a positive light as possible. It hurts me when I get people who message me and they're sad. They say, why does my bread not look like yours? Frown face, cry face. I'm just like, no, don't think of it that way. I do different things in my kitchen than the average baker would. I don't bake once a week. I don't keep my starter in the fridge. Like, these things affect the final product. I've been doing this now for 5 years. It's gonna be different. It's a learning progression over time, and not every bake is Instagrammable. It doesn't mean it's not a beautiful, even perfect bread,
So how much do you rely then on timings these days? Do you have your own timings, or how much is it of a look and feel of the dough? Yeah. How important is that?
I will set it. If I set a timer and I go by timer, I'm usually gonna still be okay, because I always use the same amount of starter. Not always. I mostly use the same amount of starter. Starter is always at the same approximate peak level. I use approximately the same flour combinations. What I'll usually do is I'll set a timer about a half an hour earlier than my normal 6-hour bulk period. And And obviously, I'm always touching base with the dough every time I do a coil fold, right? So I come back to the dough every hour at least, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, what does this dough need now?
Mhm.
I am no way judging when to do a coil fold based on timers. Not at all. That goes
Okay.
out the window. That is all by looking at the dough.
Okay. And how it feels.
Yes. When I do a coil, I'm judging. I'm judging how it's feeling. So if I'm doing a coil and I'm like, oh, this seems really tight,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to skip the other half of this coil fold and only do like one axis, not the other. That is bake to bake dependent. Depends what I put in it. So yeah, it's a lot based on feel.
And I do have two more follow-up questions on that, because I've seen you using a technique, that, not in exactly the same jar. You call the, I don't know how to pronounce it, the aliquot jar? Aliquot jar, yes. Is that word coming from your PhD in biology?
So we would have little aliquots of things that we would have to then freeze down in the deep freezer.
Okay.
All the time. It's funny how that word just is what it is. And so I just use it, just expecting everyone to know what an aliquot is. So what the concept there is, I was looking at my dough in the little dish, my single little dough in this big-ish 8x8 dish. And I was like, how in the world are bakers judging how, even if this thing is rising or not? And also from like a teaching standpoint, how can I visualize that this other person's dough is rising when I cannot see it in real life?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of shrinking down my 8x8 tub into something that would be the same volumetric dimensions as someone working with high volume baking. So like those big Cambro tubs full of dough where you can literally mark with a marker and just judge, oh, it's risen 50% or whatever it is, 80%. You can see it. You can't see it in these little dishes. So cutting off this little piece of dough stemmed from that concept.
Okay.
So after coming up with this idea, I have seen it since. And I think probably this technique has been around for hundreds of years to help monitor dough rise. I saw it on a YouTube video about panettone first dough rise.
Okay.
Even though you can kind of see it, they were saying like it's nice to like take a little piece off, and that was so cool to see it in that application. I think it's really helpful though.
It's really helpful. I think so too.
It's funny when I made my first how to make open crumb basic loaf whatever video for YouTube, the one that's getting more traction than the others. I had a version of that video with the aliquot jar, but the problem was, as I used it more and more, I noticed I would have differences in rise depending on the hydration of the dough, depending on the type of flour I was using. And so these things, I don't want to overcomplicate this. I was thinking, I don't want to make this so complicated that it's starting to go using words like aliquot. I don't want to talk about this. What I want to talk about is, connecting with the dough and like looking at it and seeing.
Okay, makes sense.
So I brought that out in an Instagram post, and I think it can be helpful, but I think it's only helpful when you use it in one bread recipe, bake after bake after bake after bake, and sort of trying to keep the conditions the same as possible, same temperature, same hydration, all of that, and using it to sort of gauge like, oh, last time I overproofed, so next time I'm gonna only let that aliquot rise to 80%, not 100%, or whatever it might be.
So these days when you bake in private, do you still use the same method, or is it then mostly that you rely on sort of the look and feel of the dough?
Look and feel.
Look and feel, yeah, that's interesting.
But it's helpful. Like when I do consults, I always tell people if they can handle it, find a little spice jar, cut off a little piece of your dough. That way I can at least see if the dough is rising. And by the way, you really have to mix that dough well. So when I do an aliquot, I'm sort of over mixing the dough to make sure that the salt and the levain is the same in every little corner of the dough. So when I cut it off, it's truly representative of the whole mass.
So I did the same mistake at the start. Then it would be just that either the dough or the aliquot would rise faster than the other, right?
Well, it does rise faster anyway, because you're not constantly degassing it and strengthening it, but it should rise at the same rate.
True, makes sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You should be able to say something about the main dough based on the aliquot dough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great method, which also helped me to just see, and also to everybody who just starts with baking and they don't know how ready their sourdough really is. It just helps them to see and visualize whether there's any activity going on or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and one thing that I saw on your Instagram is here, this looks like a nice starter jar, and there it says foolproof baking. So are you working on your own starter jars now?
I am. So we came up with, I'm working with a man named Matthew Mento McGregor, and he had contacted me back last spring, and he was like, hey, I've got this idea. He was already selling something like this, like a version 1 of this jar. He was looking for a partner in crime to sort of jazz it up a little bit and maybe have a name behind it, and talk about this in a way that would help get it out there to people and help them in their baking. So yeah, these starter jars are for micro feeding your starter. So for people like me who use small, so you use like a ratio to feed your starter, 1 to 1, 1 to 5 to 5, but using these very small volumes, 5 grams, 10 grams of starter, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes where your starter is rising in the jar, tripling, quadrupling, doubling, whatever it is. So putting this ruler on the jar was the key feature that I would literally hold a ruler up to my jar often. Like I would put that rubber band on the bottom, I would hold the ruler up, and I would do the mathematical calculation to see. It's not just because I'm a crazy person. It's because I'm trying to track my starter's activity and make sure it's consistent day after day. If my starter is not rising 3.4x on day 5, even though day 1 through 4 it's been rising that amount, I know something might be off. So then
that's
I can
a valid point. Yeah.
Temperature, maybe the flour, I mixed the rye into my bread flour not quite right, or whatever it might be, and it can still help me sort of narrow in on little details. This is for crazy people. We're crazy people because we're so detail-oriented about this stuff. Other people think this is nuts. They think it's crazy. But I love it.
Yeah, people sometimes comment on the YouTube videos, okay, thank you very much. I'm now off to the baker to buy my own bread. Thank you. This was interesting, but this is not for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Oh, and by the way, so we just finished up printing of the new jars. And today I got from the manufacturer a set of 10 samples so that I can run them through my dishwasher a bunch of times and scratch on them with coins and like try to destroy them and do quality control checking. So this is the new.
Oh, and so that's a small thermometer on them, or what is that?
It's all like reverse for me. It's hard to see.
Is there a battery inside?
Computer, no battery. So these are so cool and so nerdy. You find these are like found in aquariums.
Okay.
They stick permanently. They're like little stickers, and they tell you the temperature. And there's a lot of information in this little band. So you get like the green color tells you that the temperature is precisely at that temperature.
Wow.
The blue band tells you that the temperature is just a little above that value. And actually, if this was a little warmer in here, you would start to see the 79 band show up, and that would be tan color. That tells you the temperature is a little bit below that temperature. Anyway.
And this is dishwasher safe.
Dishwasher safe. That was key importance for us. Can you still see me, or am I frozen?
You're a little bit frozen, but not. Well, yes. Now, hello.
Oh, wait a second.
Wait a second. Now you are not there anymore. Can you still hear me though?
Yes.
Oh, maybe
Yes,
just try reloading the page once, and then I think you should
right,
be
I'm
back
gonna
on the
try.
stream. Yes. Wow, seriously impressive what Kristen has done for the sourdough world. And please also check out her Instagram account. That's Foolproof Baking, and also her YouTube account. And she is back. Hello again.
It's so weird. I don't understand Wi-Fi, but my son just walked past our router. I don't know why. Sometimes it just kills the internet signal. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I feel the tech is also still not a solved problem. There's still always, also when you're doing, now that you have work from home and you have to do a conference call, something never works, right? There's always something broken.
We were lucky when we moved into this rental. We got fiber internet.
Oh, that's amazing.
So wonderful.
Fast.
It is great.
There was a great question from another viewer that I wanted to ask you, and I have been wondering the same, and I'm going to put that here on the screen. Mr. Person has asked, what is the most important variable in achieving your perfect open crumb?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what is perfect? I mean, what is open crumb? Can we get philosophical? So, if you're making sandwich bread, you don't want a crumb like this. Mm-hmm. If you're making bagels, this would not be good. So let's just talk about a bread this is a different structure, right? Influenced by the inclusions I put in. So if you put cocoa powder, this is going to disrupt gluten bonds. It's going to disrupt the way that the loaf looks on the inside. It's got oils that are coming from the chocolate. So this breaks down those gluten walls. You can't get the same crumb. So perfect depending on the bread, right? So what I like is a properly fermented bread. Mm-hmm. That to me is perfect. When it's open all over, you've got those microbes as much as possible have, evenly fermented that dough, and you get more or less evenness in the way that the yeast pumped out carbon dioxide. It has to have the right flavor. I don't want it to be too sour. So the perfect open crumb, I think this is not a tangible thing. Okay. This is in theory, a thing. You can talk about open crumb, but I think it very much depends on the bake you want to make that day. Me personally, that bread that you just showed, the higher whole grain one.
Yes, this one, right?
That to me is a perfect crumb, and it comes down to ideally having the most active, fast rising starter possible. So you get a nice fast ferment on your dough without the dough breaking down due to enzymatic degradation, and the starches releasing too much sugar. You won't get that gumminess into the loaf, something like that. And then you have flavor compounds from protease activity, and it's a bunch of things. It's handling, right? So handling that dough and making sure that it's given the amount of strength that it needs without going overboard and without making it too slack. So I high hydration helps me because it keeps the dough extensible. My coil folds are very strong. So one coil fold imparts a lot of strength and structure into the dough. So just managing that bake to bake.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, it's not specific.
No, I think it just answers and shows the complexity of, you just have to find the perfect balance between all the different parameters to make the perfect sourdough, right? And then also, what's the perfect sourdough? It depends on what you want. It's a personal question, personal preference.
Absolutely. And a perfect crumb for 100% whole grain with bits of, bran and floating around in it is going to look a lot different than one made from 100% strong, high protein flour. They're going to be different. You can't accomplish the same thing with all of these different flours.
Yeah, Kristen, we have already been chatting for almost 1.5 hours. It feels like we've only been chatting for 5 minutes. This has been so much incredible information.
I cannot believe it's been that long.
We could probably continue chatting the whole day on sourdough, I guess.
I think you're right. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Really cool experience.
Thank you so much for dedicating the time and for answering all those questions. I think you are inspiring many bakers all around the world. And I think it's just such an amazing hobby to work on sourdough bread. And that's really cool that you're doing this.
Yes. And I love to see what you're doing too. It's so cool. I love the experiments. And I love nerdy bread bakers. I think it's just it's the best, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's also why so many engineers like it, because for sourdough, you have a set of instructions. It's something that you have to follow. And it really makes a difference sometimes. If you just increase one ingredient by 5 grams or so, you can't just eyeball it. Well, at some point you can. If you've baked 10,000 loaves or so, probably then you can start eyeballing it. But at the start, you have to be very precise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just play with it. Have fun. You know, you can just see what happens. It's just one of those things where, you know, if you don't know what's going to happen, just try it and see. Yeah. It'll be fun.
And I think we should be repeating this maybe in a year from now and just sharing what we have learned in the last year. And probably we will think, okay, sourdough is even more complicated than I thought.
Oh, yeah. Of course. There'll just be a million more questions to answer, but yes.
So yeah, thank you again. And everybody, please make sure to check out Kristen's account on Instagram and on YouTube as well, Foolproof Baking. Kristen, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you so much.